Once there's a blueprint for success, people generally tend to stick to it. This applies not just to life, but definitely in the world of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Take Burn for example. While many of the strong cards have changed throughout the years, a lot of the core concepts still remain from the DM era days. As the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Although in Yu-Gi-Oh! A better saying might be, if it ain't broke, don't play it, but I digress. People like to use what's been proven to work, and being a guinea pig for new theories is often hard work, time-consuming, and just unfulfilling. But during the GX era, before Yu-Gi-Oh! Was such an archetype-structured game, people went against the grain and conventional wisdom all the time. It's how some of the most fascinating and original decks were created. Today you'll learn about a bold duelist who changed everything that we thought we knew about how a burn deck can be constructed, and how he tested this mad science experiment at one of the largest tournaments of the year. Put together a short list of the most successful burn decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! History, and you'll probably notice two common themes. Theme number one, cards that do massive amounts of effect damage. This is not only the essence of burn itself in Yu-Gi-Oh!, but also the win condition of burn decks. Theme number two, cards that slow the opponent down and impede them. We generally call this stall. Since burn decks have to commit to cards that largely do nothing else other than effect damage, they generally don't have room for defensive removal cards and really don't even benefit from them that much. It's often better to lock down the usefulness of the opponent's monsters rather than removing them. After all, who cares if your opponent has 5 monsters on field if they're no threat to you? Those two themes of burn flat out work, and it's been proven throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! History over and over again. The legendary Comic Odyssey or CO Burn, Chain Burn, and Mystic Mind Burn have all seen high level success. But what if I told you one crazy 15-year-old duelist from Wisconsin dared to play a burn deck in a way that no one saw coming and no one was prepared for? Introducing Justin Womack, just a regular Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist who prior to this story had no huge noteworthy competitive accomplishments. He wasn't a member of one of the big, prestigious, and accomplished Yu-Gi-Oh! Teams. Also, he had no Shonen Jump top finishes. But little did the world know, he was going to become the biggest storyline of the 2007 United States Championship. 2007 really was a fun and fascinating year for Yu-Gi-Oh! Machines were all the rage, D-Heroes paired with Stratos were just as dominant, and Monarchs of course were as prevalent as always. It was a time where duels tended to be extremely grindy, but thanks to cards like Snatch Steal, Ring of Destruction, and Brain Control, which was completely unlimited at the time, offensive explosions were pretty frequent. In June 2007, one Justin Womack entered the US Championship with an incredibly unique deck attempting to capitalize on those very explosions. Half burn, half beatdown, all aggression. Womack's burn, Dark World burn, aggro burn, etc, etc. Justin never officially named his deck, so it goes by many titles. His goal with this deck was simple: to drop your life points to 0 as quickly as possible, usually using a random 3 to 4 card combination. If you look at Womack burn on paper, it's probably really difficult to understand how and why it worked. At first glance, it looks like a jumbled mess of cards that's just thrown together, but trust me, this was deck building genius at its finest. The first thing you must understand about this deck is that it's not much suited for long, drawn out, grindy games. This deck is tailored to strike hard, fast, and often. The machines are the core, and the likes of Card Trooper and Cyber Dragon gave Womack the ability to have instant offense as well as game-ending power when combined with cards such as Limiter Removal and Machine Duplication. The machines also gave Womack some floating power with Trooper and Cyber Phoenix, who both had easy to trigger draw effects that could replace themselves instantly. Next up was the completely out of the ordinary Dark World and Lily package. Injection Fairy, Lily, and Gold were both huge damage threats that could come out of nowhere to end games. Lily even more so because of her potential 3400 attack that could beat over basically anything in the game not named Spirit Reaper. However, if your opponent did have Reaper on the field out in attack position, they were in for a world of hurt. Gold on the other hand worked beautifully in conjunction with Card Destruction, Morphing Jar, and Dark World Lightning. He could add offense while fueling utility effects such as spell and trap removal or drawing cards. Lastly, there was Womack's unpredictable burn engine, magic cylinders, ceasefire, ring of destruction, and an entire playset of Dimension Wall. Out of this package, only Ring of Destruction was standard during that format, and the others were used exclusively in burn strategies, hence why this is classified as a burn deck. These cards were the perfect way for Womack to seal up victory when his opponent was low on life points, but possibly high in card advantage. It's long been said that in GOAT format, life points actually matter, and the further we got from then, the less they did. For the most part, that was pretty true in 2007. Life points didn't matter that much. The only pure burn card people ran during this format was Ring of Destruction, and the majority of players tended to play more cautiously when in the danger zone for that card. However, Womack believed that effect damage only cards could still be useful in a limited role. While full-on burn decks like Chain Burn would often put forth almost all their resources into doing burn damage with no investment on field presence, the bane of their existence was always the side deck. People would side in piles of trap hate to suppress the traps, then capitalize on the fact that burn decks really weren't built to have a lot of monsters on field. However, Womack's deck didn't suffer from this. In any given duel, his burn cards could range from game-winning to barely impactful, so siding to stop 15% of his deck that he might not need to win anyways wasn't going to be effective. By making his deck so incredibly aggressive and damage focused, he actually created a strategy where the burn cards could easily be the reason why he won, but almost never the reason why he lost. The obvious trade-off was that he probably had to kill you before running out of cards, but wisely he even built some failsafes in to deal with that. Morphing Jar might seem completely out of place in his deck, but it was the perfect way for him to refill his hand if he spent most of his cards on trying to deal out raw damage. It could also trigger Dark World Gold, which would provide him with more offense at the same time. Add this to the previously mentioned draw effects from Cyber Phoenix and Card Trooper, and this deck's recovery probably isn't nearly the Achilles heel as it might seem. Another aspect that made Womack's deck so brilliant in its damage over advantage mindset was that the deck inherently benefited off of the 2007 life points don't matter mentality. As stated earlier, outside of Ring of Destruction, which was limited to 1 at the time, duelists didn't generally care about being low on life points. Cards like Premature Burial and Brain Control both had life point costs, but they were tiny. So much so, even if you were at 2,000 life points for example, you could resolve both of those cards back to back. The mindset meant that players were often inclined to let you take small shots at their life points earlier in the game, as long as they stayed above that Ring of Destruction danger zone. It was better to lose 1900 life points to a Card Trooper attack than to waste the Mirror Force, i.e. card advantage, knowing your opponent would draw a new card to replace the Trooper and you'd ultimately take a -1. The smarter play would be to take the attack, save the Mirror Force, and out the Trooper using a card like Brain Control or Snatch Steel, possibly using it for a tribute summon so that you don't fall behind in advantage in a grindy format where you need that advantage. That's how players thought, and this usually led to easier victories for Womack. Since this deck excelled at doing damage quickly, it often meant that Womack didn't have to do 8,000 damage in a single turn because he had already chipped away at the opponent's life points in prior turns and laid down the groundwork for victory. As it turned out, this wasn't just great Yu-Gi-Oh theory, however. Justin took his eyebrow-raising theory to the largest tournament of the entire year at the 2007 US National Championship and probably surprised even himself. He was absolutely on fire during day one, ending with an impressive 9-1 record during Swiss, and I must point out, his one and only loss that day is because he inexplicably showed up at the wrong table where he ended up winning that duel too. Go figure. Anyways, one thing was very clear as the tournament progressed. Duelists simply didn't know how to deal with Womack's deck. When you saw the machines and the power spells, you thought it was simply a standard machine deck, but then duelists were often confused by the sight of Dark World cards and Injection Fairy Lily, thinking that something fishy was going on. Then there were the burn cards, which historically are some of the most difficult cards in Yu-Gi-Oh to counter, especially in Game 1. Simply put, it was hard to figure out just what Womack was trying to do before it was too late. In fact, to prove this, I'd like to jump ahead for a second and point out that Womack's top 16 opponent, Ian Sabatianok, was also, ironically, his round 8 opponent. I know this because both duels received feature matches, and as I'm alluding to, both duels were won by Womack. Ian had multiple opportunities and matches to figure out Womack's deck so that he could beat it, and still couldn't do it. He continued on in day 2 to beat 2 T-Hero decks back to back in top 16 and top 8. His top 8 match was against Kyle Hintz, who had just come off a top 4 finish at Shonen Jump Minneapolis earlier that month, playing nearly the same exact deck. His victory over Hintz not only put Womack just 2 wins short of becoming the US champion, but also punched his ticket to the 2007 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship. Quite frankly, Womack just kept finding crazy ways to steal wins. For instance, in the top 16, in a duel where he was heavily behind in and down game 1, he went in to attack directly with Cyber Dragon. This attack would have been largely inconsequential. His opponent used Ring of Destruction targeting the Cyber Dragon, only to have Womack chain his own limiter removal. With his opponent only having 4,100 life points to his own 5,300, he won the game and would come back to win the match. His final duel versus Hintz in the quarterfinals went by in a flash, ending on just turn 4 of the duel. In a wild turn of events, both players activated Snatch Steal on their second turn and combined to use Injection Fairy Lily's effect 4 times over 4 turns. This was the wild and crazy nature of Womack's deck and how a lot of his duels played out. As hot as Justin Womack was on that weekend, sadly it was not to be, as Womack fell in the semifinals to Brian Rockenbach's 12-gauge Monarch deck. It was quite the interesting conclusion because at that point, Womack was on such a hot streak and it caused so much buzz that many believed nothing would stop him. In the end, Justin Womack really redefined not only what a burn deck could be, but also how it could play. In fact, it's very likely his deck laid out the groundwork for another shortly lived tier 1 burn deck during the GX era. The community was so impressed by his success and creativity with this deck that even the legendary Matt Petal wrote a full article on Womack and his deck as part of his The Champion series. If you're wondering why Womack's deck fell out of favor, in my personal opinion, there were 2 main reasons. Reason number 1, there was a fair amount of variance when it came to the quality of opening hands. Reason number 2, the deck just wasn't for everyone. As stated earlier, this was a deck that didn't grind well in a grindy format, and it often meant that you had to play incredibly aggressive, some might even say reckless, to achieve the maximum success. The margin for victory and defeat was often incredibly small with Womack's deck, and this meant essentially playing every duel on the razor's edge. Womack's deck may not have lasted long in an ever-changing and evolving metagame, but it was definitely an underappreciated gem. I thank you very much for tuning in to this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like this one.